Hello, beautiful friends. Thank you so much for voluntarily hanging out with me again in my little tiny teensy corner of the internet. I hope this video finds you well and that you are just having the best week of all time. If you have not seen this face before, then hi, my name's Liz, and I quite often sit in this chair and talk about things like true crime and unresolved mysteries. And if you are into those things too, then you should probably just hit subscribe and we can be best friends forever if you want. And if you don't want, because we're best friends now. Joining us, of course, today, as usual, is Lily Girl, the real star of the show, here to give us just top-notch emotional support and to, of course, introduce lots of visual and audio disturbances into the video. Editing Liz, let's switch to Lily Cam. How did you get so pretty, Lily Girl? Are you all snuggled in? You ready? So the case I have for you guys today is just crazy. Heads up, it's pretty blink and you'll miss it. So I highly recommend putting your phone down just for a little while, just so that you don't miss something and get confused. Because there are just so many twists and turns in this case. It's like a movie. So much so, in fact, that this case earned the nickname the Gone Girl case, which is what drew my attention originally, because Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is like my favorite book of all time. Like, I've read it so many times that my husband should probably be a little bit nervous. If you are unfamiliar with Gone Girl, I mean, you're missing out, but don't worry, you don't need to be familiar with the plot of Gone Girl to be able to follow along with today's video. All you need to know is that the movie based on the book starring Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike was released in 2014, which is why it was still very fresh in everyone's minds when this case took place in 2015. So today's case centers on a couple who lived in Vallejo, California, Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn. Denise and Aaron both worked in physical therapy and had met where they worked at Kaiser Permanente. Although initially they weren't romantically interested in each other, they eventually hit it off at a staff event over drinks where sparks flew and they fell in love. So if we fast forward to the 22nd of March 2015, Denise and Aaron had been dating for about 7 months and things were just going fantastic. And as she had multiple times before, Denise stayed the night at Aaron's house on Mare Island in Vallejo, which was a very respectable neighborhood filled with nice homes and nice people and basically a very safe area. But the next day, on the 23rd of March, a phone call came into 911 from Aaron saying that Denise had been kidnapped the previous night. Police were on the scene at Aaron's house literally just a couple of minutes after the phone call came in, and Aaron seemed really groggy and disorientated, but was very cooperative and quickly shared the details of the kidnapping with the police. He said that he and Denise had had a couple of beers and whiskeys the previous night, watched some TV, and then gone to bed at about 1 a.m., just a really chill night. But he had then been woken up at about 3 a.m. by a bright light from a laser from a gun pointed in his face, the electrical sound of a stun gun, and a male voice calling both him and Denise by their names and telling them to lay face down on the bed. Denise had been told by the man to tie up Aaron's hands and feet with zip ties, and then they were both placed into the closet of the master bedroom, where they had swim goggles that had been blacked out with tape placed over their eyes and headphones placed over their ears. Aaron's headphones played relaxing music and a pre-recorded message that informed him that the people in the house were a professional group there to collect financial debt. The message told him to stay calm and that he was going to be given a liquid drug to sedate him, and that if he refused this drug, it was going to be administered intravenously, as in injected, and that if he and Denise did not fully cooperate, that Denise would be hurt first by electric shock and then by cutting her face. The message went on to advise that while this little financial debt was being sorted out, Denise was going to be taken and Aaron was going to be confined to the kitchen, living room and bathroom of his house under camera surveillance. While he remained at the house, Aaron would need to keep his phone line open to await further instructions in the next 48 hours, and Denise would be safely returned at the end of this period in exchange for ransom, the amount of which was yet to be determined. Finally, Aaron was told that if he dared contact police, Denise would potentially be killed. While listening to this message, Aaron felt his vitals being taken. He said he felt a blood pressure cuff being put on and off his arm, and he then felt Denise being removed from the closet and could hear her being moved to the bedroom next door. When the message finished, the kidnapper, the man who had woken up Denise and Aaron, took Aaron's laptop and asked him for his login details for his banks, his email accounts, and his Wi-Fi. He also asked if there were any tracking or navigational systems in Aaron's car, as this would be the car that he was kidnapping Denise in. Aaron was then taken downstairs, still with the taped up swim goggles on, and placed on the couch in the living room. The drug had fully kicked in by this point and he fell asleep. When he eventually came to, Aaron found himself alone. He had been left with a change of clothes and a pair of scissors to free himself with, as well as both his and Denise's phones. He noticed that his laptop and car were missing and that Denise's car had been moved from his driveway to across the road. Also that the kitchen, living room and bathroom had been sectioned off by red duct tape on the ground, and that there was a camera on the ceiling watching his every move. Aaron picked up his phone and saw he had 2 emails from the kidnapper, politely asking for 2 payments in the next 48 hours of $8,500 each, one from his checking account and one from his credit card. The emails said this was to avoid triggering the $10,000 withdrawal limit and drawing unwanted attention, and instructed him that if he was questioned about either of these withdrawals, that he should say that he was buying a ski boat. Aaron said at this point he was at a complete loss as to what to do. Obviously, he wanted to call the police, but he had been told that doing this might result in getting Denise killed. He called his credit card company and they told him he could only withdraw $3,500 max. Aaron told police at the scene that his next call had been to his brother, a federal law enforcement officer, who told him that no, he definitely needed to call the police. So terrified that he was gambling with Denise's life, that's exactly what he did. Understandably, the Vallejo police officers who were listening to Aaron's story were a little bit caught off guard, right? This was unlike any other kidnapping they had dealt with. The details were just so meticulous and elaborate. It sounded more like a heist in a movie than a real-life kidnapping. Aaron agreed to be taken to the Vallejo Police Department for a blood test to see if there was a sedative in his system and for further questioning by detectives. And an extensive search was launched in the Vallejo area for any sign of Denise, including dive teams, search dogs, aerial searches, the police putting out a public appeal for anyone to come forward with any information they had regarding Denise's whereabouts, the whole shebang. Aaron's car was found at about 6 p.m. that day by the California Highway Air Patrol unit, neatly backed into a parking spot at Mare Island's Department of Veteran Affairs Clinic, with the doors locked and the keys neatly placed on the left rear tire. The car had been relatively easy to spot because it had strips of red tape on the roof, the same red tape that had been used in Aaron's house. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, things were not looking fantastic for Aaron right now. He had been the last one to see Denise, and all he had was this crazy kidnapping story. So he was in some pretty hot water, and police made this fairly obvious to him from very early on. In fact, police were already forming a theory that Aaron had murdered Denise and then come up with this crazy kidnapping story to try and cover it up. So while to the press, the police said that they were investigating Denise's disappearance as a kidnapping for ransom, Behind closed doors at the Vallejo Police Department, they interrogated Aaron for 18 hours. During this interrogation, which took place in a windowless room with no clock, so he had no idea how long he had been in there for, police forced Aaron to wear a prison jumpsuit, gave him very little food or water, and refused to let him contact his family, telling him that if he didn't stop telling them this crazy, unbelievable story and start telling them the truth, then they were going to paint him as a cold, calculated killer. At 2 a.m. on the 24th of March, so roughly 24 hours after he told police that Denise had been kidnapped, Aaron agreed to a polygraph test to be conducted by the FBI, who had been brought in to assist in the investigation. The results of the polygraph were inconclusive, and after being asked some more accusatory questions, Aaron finally ended this long interrogation, asked to speak to an attorney, and left the station. At 12:23 p.m. that same day, an email was sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, and the email was sent from Denise's name, but from Aaron's email account. And the email said that Denise would be returned safe and unharmed the next day, and that a link to her location would be sent once she had been dropped off. It also warned that any advancements on the kidnappers in the meantime would result in a very dangerous situation for Denise. And attached to the email was a proof of life audio recording of Denise saying that she had been kidnapped, but apart from that, she was fine. To prove that it was her, she said that her first concert she had ever gone to was Blink-182, and to prove that it was current and she was still alive, she mentioned the German airliner that had crashed into the French Alps that morning. Both Aaron and her father, Mike Huskins, listened to the recording and confirmed that it was in fact Denise. Later that night, Aaron returned to the Vallejo police station, this time with his attorney, and showed detectives his phone, which had 2 missed calls from an unknown number that had come in at about 8:30 p.m. the previous night. And Aaron told detectives that he thought that these phone calls had come from the kidnappers because, as you'll remember, Aaron had been told to keep his phone line open for further instructions. But at the time the calls came in, the phone had been in airplane mode in police custody while Aaron was being interrogated. So police obtained a warrant and contacted AT&T, who told them that the phone that the calls had come from had been purchased from a Target on the 2nd of March. They then contacted the Target and managed to get surveillance footage of the purchase when it had taken place. The man that bought the phone was fair-skinned with dark hair and a medium build. He was wearing a dark polo with dark shorts, and he definitely was not Aaron. Police were also able to trace the calls and found that they had been made from South Lake Tahoe, a whole 3-hour drive away from Aaron's house in Mare Island. This threw a bit of a spanner into the police's whole Aaron killed Denise theory, but maybe he just had an accomplice, or maybe he was lying and the calls had nothing to do with Denise's disappearance. So essentially the calls didn't really prove anything. Then, the next day, on the 25th of March, just before 10 a.m., Denise's dad, Mike Huskins, called the Vallejo Police Department to let them know that he had just spoken with Denise, and she was at his neighbor's house in Huntington Beach, a whole 7-hour drive away from where she had been kidnapped. Not only had the ransom not been paid, but Huntington Beach was Denise's hometown, and she had been dropped off literally down the road from her mother's house. So the Huntington Beach police quickly arrived at the scene at the request of the Vallejo Police Department to speak with Denise. And her story of the kidnapping matches up perfectly with Aaron's story. The waking up at 3 a.m. to a bright light in her face and a man's voice telling her to tie up Aaron, being put in the closet, the blacked out swim goggles, the headphones playing relaxing music and a calming voice. She said that after she had been moved to the other bedroom, the kidnapper quickly picked up her belongings for her in her backpack and purse. And then while she was still blindfolded with the swim goggles, she was very politely placed into the trunk of Aaron's car. She wasn't sure how long she had been in the trunk because, of course, she as well had been given sedatives before it opened, and she was asked to get into the trunk of another car. Once she was let out of this second trunk and out of the garage where the car had been parked, she found herself in what she believed to be a quiet, mid-sized house, and she was taken to a bedroom furnished with a queen-size bed and a dresser where the windows had been barricaded so she couldn't see out. She was told that she could take the swim goggles off, but she had to put them back on any time she dealt with the kidnapper, and she was secured to the bed with zip ties and a bike lock. She told the Huntington police that there was a man in the bedroom with her for the majority of her captivity, but that she never saw his face or learned his name. But this man had made it clear to her that the intention was never to hurt or kill her, that the kidnapping was just about achieving a financial goal, but that she was now scared of what the repercussions would be for her speaking to police, and she was wary about what details she was telling them would be released to the public. Denise said that she had been sedated for a large portion of the time that she had been held, but during the time she was awake, she had been treated well. She'd been given food and water and allowed access to a bathroom. When asked, she said that she hadn't been sexually assaulted during her ordeal, instead pointing out that the kidnapper had given her the shoes she was wearing and the large bottle of water she had with her. She said that a couple of days into her captivity, it was decided that she would be dropped off at Huntington Beach, a place that her kidnapper said she would be safe and with family and quote unquote away from the commotion of the authorities in Vallejo. So the kidnapper had clearly been following the press coverage of the case. So Denise had then been blindfolded with the swim goggles again and told to lay down in the back seat of a car. She wasn't sure how long she was in the car because she had been given another sedative, but when asked to describe the car, she said it had been a white mid-sized vehicle with a loud modified exhaust. And then when the car stopped, the kidnapper helped her out of the car, grabbed her bags for her and took her swim goggles off, but she still couldn't see because her eyes had been taped shut underneath. The kidnapper told her to turn away and not look back as the car drove away. So as soon as she could no longer hear the car, she took the tape off her eyes, got her bearings and started walking to her mother's house down the street. But no one had been home. So she asked the gardener working in the front yard next door if she could borrow his phone, and then she walked to her dad's house, which wasn't far away. Denise was shown a map of the area she'd been dropped off in, and she pointed out to police the exact alley she'd been left in. So police went to the alley and searched for any evidence that she had been there, including the discarded tape she had taken off her eyes, but they found nothing. The Huntington Beach police told the Vallejo police that Denise had been remarkably calm during the questioning, and that although she had dark impressions under her eyes consistent with wearing swim goggles for an extended period, she had no injuries and had turned down medical assistance, and that she had advised that no sexual assault had taken place. That same morning, the gardener that had let Denise use his phone contacted the police, and he said that Denise had asked for his phone because she needed to call someone to get picked up, and that she had made 2 phone calls, and that at one point he had heard her very casually say she had just been dropped off at her mum's. When police asked him if Denise had seemed frightened or nervous or excited, he said no, that he felt Denise had been acting completely normally, and this did not sit well with police, nor the fact that on her way from her mum's house to her dad's house, Denise had walked straight past a police station. So the FBI arranged for a jet to fly Denise back from Huntington Beach to North California for further questioning, but when the time came at around 11 a.m., she was nowhere to be found. She also wasn't answering their phone calls or responding to requests made through friends and family for her to call them. She had essentially cut off all contact and had followed in Aaron's footsteps and gotten a lawyer. And this proved to be the final straw for the Vallejo Police Department. That night at about 9:30 p.m., about 10 hours after Denise had shown up unharmed, their public information officer, Lieutenant Kenny Park, made a statement to the press. And this statement was scathing. Lieutenant Park said that they had discovered no evidence to show that this had been a legitimate abduction and that the kidnapping appeared to not have been a kidnapping at all, but in fact an orchestrated event.
Our investigation has concluded that none of the claims has been substantiated. Mr. Quinn and Ms. Huskins has plundered valuable resources away from our community. If you can imagine devoting all of our resources 24 hours a day on what I will classify as a wild goose chase. It's a tremendous loss. It's disappointing, it's disheartening, and the fact that we've essentially wasted all of these resources for really nothing is upsetting.
For this, he said that Denise and Aaron owed the Vallejo community an apology, and that if police managed to find any indication that the couple had committed a criminal act, they would be pressing state or federal charges. As you can imagine, the press just went absolutely insane. We are talking full spiral mode. They had already been closely following and reporting on Denise's disappearance and the search efforts. So when it was revealed that it was all most likely a hoax, the case pretty much instantaneously earned that nickname, the Gone Girl case, and just got more coverage.
Everything about this kidnap screams out hoax.
Police say the kidnapping was a hoax.
An orchestrated hoax. Kidnapping hoax.
And the public were both entertained and enraged at the same time. I mean, the story was so ridiculous, it was almost funny. But how dare this woman and her boyfriend waste police's time and effort when real crimes were being committed? On the 26th of March, the day after this damning press statement, seemingly undeterred, Denise returned to the Vallejo police station, this time with her attorney, to confirm the statements she had made to the Huntington Beach police. When she was questioned about the audio recording that had been attached to the email sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, there was a serious discrepancy revealed. Denise said that it had been recorded on the evening of the 24th. But this wasn't possible, as the metadata from the audio file showed that it had been recorded in the morning of the 24th. And not only that, but the email it had been sent in had been sent at noon that day. On top of this, Denise also had new information that she hadn't provided earlier. She said that despite originally reporting that she hadn't been sexually assaulted by her kidnapper, that this actually wasn't the case. That on the first night of her captivity, she had been raped not once but twice by the man that had been in the room with her. And he had filmed it, telling her that his boss was making him do this so that they could use the footage as leverage to deter her from speaking to authorities. She told detectives that after the initial assault, the man had told her that his boss wasn't happy with the video and to do it again but make it seem consensual, like they were boyfriend and girlfriend. So police took Denise to the Queen of the Valley Hospital in Napa to be examined by the sexual assault response team there. But the team reported that this examination revealed no evidence of non-consensual sex. In the next couple of days, 2 more emails were sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, and these emails were apparently the kidnappers' direct response to the public statements made by the Vallejo Police Department accusing Denise and Aaron of faking the kidnapping. These emails read like novels or movie scripts. They were very long. In fact, one of them was 15 pages long and just full of incredible details. These emails claim to be from a group of between 2 and 8 professional thieves who were behind Denise's kidnapping, a kidnapping that they swore had in fact taken place, despite police's decidedly skeptical response to Denise and Aaron's claims. These alleged kidnappers sounded sounded very Robin Hood-esque and said they thought of themselves as kind of an Ocean's 11, that they had originally targeted high market, late model cars that they knew would be insured, so no one would really be missing out when they stole them and sold them on the black market. But they said they eventually grew unsatisfied with the payoff of stealing cars and decided instead to move into kidnapping for ransom, planning on just completing a few high-value kidnappings where no one really got hurt, and then retiring and living off the money they made from these jobs. They gave extensive details of the night Denise was kidnapped and revealed that it had actually been their first kidnapping and that it was in fact a kidnapping gone wrong, a case of mistaken identity. Because despite the extensive research they had put into the job, they had thought that Denise was Aaron's ex-fiancée, when in fact Aaron and his ex-fiancée had broken up the previous September. They said they realized their mistake on the night that they took Denise, but decided to go ahead anyway, figuring they were too deep to back out now and reasoning that it would be good training for the next kidnapping. But during the time they held Denise, they realized what a good person she was, amazed that she was more concerned for her family and her physical therapy clients than she was for her own safety. So feeling incredibly guilty and remorseful, they decided to let her go, which explains why she turned up before the ransom had been paid. The writer of these emails said that this group refused to stand by, while Denise, after she had shown such strength and resilience while suffering such a horrific experience at their hands, was essentially crucified by the Vallejo Police Department and the media. As proof of their claims, they attached an image of a water pistol that had been spray painted black with a laser pointer duct taped to the top of it, and they said that this was what had been used during the kidnapping rather than a real firearm, so that there was no risk of anyone really getting hurt. They also mentioned the red tape found on the roof of Aaron's car, saying that it had been placed there so that the car would be easier for their drone to spot during later stages of the operation, which obviously never ended up taking place. The emails also included tons of details about crimes the group claimed to have committed in the Vallejo area, including breaking and entering and of course stealing cars. And they listed off the details of some of these cars and the people they had stolen them from in an effort to legitimize their story. Now, when police looked into these crimes, surprisingly they did actually check out with reported crimes that had been investigated in the Vallejo area. But after a little bit more sleuthing, they found that these crimes had also been reported in detail on like a neighborhood watch page that Aaron was an active member of. On the 30th of March, another email was sent, again claiming to be from the kidnappers, but this time it was sent to Lieutenant Kenny Park, who had made those press statements about Denise and Aaron faking the kidnapping, and the email threatened him, saying that something bad was going to happen if the Vallejo Police Department did not issue a public formal apology to the couple within the next 24 hours. This was followed up with another email about 12 hours later apologizing for the earlier ultimatum, and with the writer instead offering to turn himself in exchange for the public apology to the couple and indemnity for his accomplices. All these emails really achieved was cementing the police's opinion that the kidnapping was not legitimate. They did not issue a public apology, and they did not put really any more effort into investigating the case. They were pretty much fed up with it. And then a couple of months later, on the 5th of June at about 3:30 a.m., Alameda County deputies responded to a reported home invasion style robbery that had taken place in an area called Dublin, just under an hour's drive away from Vallejo. The family who lived in the house was a husband and wife and their young adult daughter, and the husband and wife had been asleep in bed when they had been awoken by a bright light in their faces and a man's voice telling telling them to lay face down on the bed so that he could restrain them with zip ties. But when this man went to restrain the husband fought back and a struggle ensued. The wife ran and locked herself in the bathroom to call 911, and the man eventually fled when the clever husband told his wife to get the gun, even though they didn't have one. The husband and wife described the man as fair-skinned with dark hair, a medium build, about 20 to 30 years old, wearing a dark-coloured security guard uniform. When searching the property, police found zip ties, duct tape, and a fabric glove. And they also found a phone sitting neatly on a cabinet on the second floor of the house. They asked the family whose it was, and none of them recognized it, and all of them said that it hadn't been there when they went to sleep. So this meant that it had to have belonged to the suspect, that in his panic to get out of there, this guy had left behind his phone. Alameda County Police got a warrant and got in contact with the phone provider Verizon, who gave them the address the phone was registered to, which was in an area called Orangevale. And after a quick search of their database, they found that a man that was connected to that address matched the description that the family had provided. And this man's name was Matthew Muller. A quick criminal check on the 38-year-old Muller revealed that he was a subject in a burglary, criminal threats, robbery, and attempted sexual assault investigated by yet another police department, the Palo Alto Police Department, but no arrest had been made in that case. So police called this Orangevale address, and a woman picked up who said she was Matthew Muller's mother, and they gave her a description of the phone, and she said, "Yep, that's his phone. He told me he lost it earlier today." And she told Alameda police that Muller mainly resided in their house in South Lake Tahoe, which is exactly where the calls that had been missed on Aaron's phone had pinged from. I mean, talk about the puzzle pieces starting to come together, right? There had also been a stolen car located that morning, specifically a 2011 white Ford Mustang, located very close to the South Lake house. And when police did a search on this car, they found that it had been stolen in Vallejo. Now, a 2011 white Ford Mustang was detailed in the emails from the kidnappers as one of the many they had stolen. And this white Ford Mustang was stolen from the exact street address that the kidnappers said they had stolen it from, and it matched the description of the vehicle Denise said she had been driven in to Huntington Beach. And just as, icing on the cake, Matthew Muller's driver's license was found underneath the front passenger seat of the car. I mean, it's not looking good for Matthew Muller. Anyway, the Alameda County Police get a warrant for Muller's arrest, and on the 8th of June at 7:15 a.m., they storm the South Lake house and arrest Muller on the spot. And amongst the evidence they seize is a laptop, the exact same one that Aaron told police was taken on the night that Denise was kidnapped. But that's not all. Later that day, when Alameda police get a chance to properly search the car, they find a water pistol that has been spray painted black with a laser pointed duct tape to the top of it. Exactly the same as the one in the image attached to the email sent to the San Francisco Chronicle. And the phone that the missed calls to Aaron's phone had come from. They also find 2 pairs of swim goggles with tape over the lenses, one of which has a long blonde hair, the same as Denise's, stuck in the tape. And when they search the history of the car's navigational system, Huntington Beach is one of the destinations that comes up. Keep in mind, though, that the Alameda police had no idea of all these connections between the case they were investigating and the Denise Huskins case. So Muller was in police custody, happily telling them all about himself. He said he was a former Marine that had served from 1995 to 1999, that he was a Harvard University trained attorney, but failed to mention he was under investigation and likely to be disbarred over allegations of lying to a client and fraudulent billing. He also informed them that he suffered from Gulf War disease, that he had issues with psychosis, and that he had been diagnosed diagnosed with bipolar disorder back in 2008. It wasn't until a few weeks later that the connections were made between Muller and the Denise Huskins case. And on the 29th of June, the FBI issued a warrant for his arrest and charged him with kidnapping. As if they needed anything else, they discovered that it was Muller in that surveillance at Target purchasing the phone that made the calls to Aaron. And it was also revealed around this time that Muller was suspected in 2 other similar cases that occurred back in 2009. On the 13th of July, Denise and Aaron held their own press conference with their attorneys, and their attorneys said that it was in fact the Vallejo Police Department that owed the couple an apology. They also urged the police to get out and find if there were any others involved in the kidnapping and get them into custody. The Vallejo Police Department declined to comment except to say that it was no longer their case to investigate. They did, however, privately email an apology to Denise a week later. Great job, guys. A federal civil rights complaint was filed that claimed that Detective Matthew Mustard, who had been the lead detective in Denise's kidnapping, had told her mother during the investigation that Denise had lied about being raped, telling her that she made it up to enjoy the excitement. It was also revealed that Denise had had to basically beg detectives for the sexual assault exam, and that she had been told to keep her clothes on and that they would do it eventually. So she was forced to spend an additional 15 hours in the clothes she had been sexually assaulted in. And on top of that, there was no evidence that the kit had ever been tested at all. On a fun little side note, Detective Mustard, who had been involved in another case in 2012 where he attempted to bully a forensic pathologist into changing a cause of death from accident to homicide, was awarded Officer of the Year for 2015. I mean, that's just so fun for him, right? On top of all of this, it was revealed that before the scathing press statement that Lieutenant Kenny Park had given, calling the kidnapping a hoax, the Vallejo Police Department Chief Andrew Bidu had sent Park a text instructing him to, quote, burn that bitch, unquote, and that he had later attempted to cover this text up so that it wouldn't be brought up in litigation. Back to Matthew Muller, despite him previously pleading not guilty, on the 29th of September 2016 in federal court in Sacramento, he pled guilty to kidnapping in exchange for a 40-year sentence as opposed to life, and prosecutors agreeing to not press any other charges. On the 16th of March 2017, Matthew Muller was sentenced to 40 years in prison by a federal judge, and 2 days later, on the 18th of March, Denise and Aaron got engaged. But they weren't rid of Muller and the Vallejo Police Department just yet. The Solano County District Attorneys announced shortly after Muller's sentencing that they would be pressing charges at a state level, specifically for all the crimes he hadn't been convicted of yet, like robbery, burglary, false imprisonment, and, sexually assaulting Denise, because the FBI by now had discovered the video recordings of the assaults. Denise and Aaron sued the city of Vallejo for defamation, and they reached a settlement of $2.5 million in March 2018. And Matthew Muller, who had announced that he would be pleading not guilty at his state trial and was being allowed to represent himself in court, and as a result cross-examine his victim, Denise, announced that he would give everything up and plead guilty, on the condition that Denise and Aaron donate half of their settlement to the Innocence Project, a non-profit that helps people who have been wrongfully convicted. He reasoned that Denise and Aaron should know how it feels to be wrongfully accused, after the Vallejo police accused them of hoaxing the kidnapping. And he also added that he only pled guilty in his federal trial because he felt bad for the couple. Denise responded by refusing his request and saying she was ready and willing to be questioned by her attacker. Now, while the state case was filed back in January 2018 and the preliminary proceedings took place in February 2019, where Denise finally came face to face with Muller as he had to sit in court and listen to her testimony recalling her horrific ordeal, it's unclear when the state trial will actually take place. Because while the date was set for September this year, Muller's mental competency to stand trial has come into question. which is quite odd considering he was deemed competent enough to represent himself in court. So it's all a bit up in the air and unclear whether the trial will proceed in September as planned. For now, Muller is being held in the care of MHM Services, a mental health services agency. And in happier news, Denise and Aaron tied the knot in September 2018, and to this day they just seem so head over heels in love with each other as they both actively campaign for victims' rights and against police corruption. And now that we have reached where this case stands as of today, let's get into final thoughts. I need a theme song for this section now. So it can't just be me. Like, this case is scary, right? I can't imagine going through what Denise and Aaron did and then essentially being thrown under the bus by the people that are supposed to be there to help and protect you. To be honest, I can totally understand the Vallejo Police Department finding the kidnapping story hard to believe. Like, it's so over the top. I can understand them being suspicious of Aaron's story at first, and then it being even more suspicious when Denise turned up unharmed down the street from her mum's house, like, without the ransom being paid. I get it. It's unbelievable. But that in no way justifies their handling of this case. Like, I have thought for days and I cannot come up with a single way that they could have handled this any worse. And to this day, they have still yet to publicly apologize to Denise or Aaron, which is so infuriating. Everyone knows they stuffed up. They really should just own up to it. And I think seeing as they were so quick to completely discredit Denise in public, apologizing in public is really the least they could do. And it's long overdue. On another note, the way the evidence fell perfectly into place towards the end of this case was so satisfying. Like, I felt like I was watching one of those stress relief videos of someone cutting clay into perfectly straight cubes or like peeling aloe vera or something. But one of the things I found super confusing was whether Matthew Muller actually worked alone or whether he had accomplices. Because according to the police and the FBI and the legal system in general, he worked alone. But both Denise and Aaron swear there were other people involved. They say they heard noises downstairs while the man assumed to be Muller was shining the red laser pointer in their faces and getting them set up with the zip ties and the swim goggles and the headphones. Aaron says he heard the man whisper to someone else at some point during the kidnapping, and Denise says that during the time that she was in the room with the man, he referred to other people in the group as like initials like T, J, and L. Not to mention the very detailed emails that said Denise had been kidnapped by a group of 2 to 8 individuals. But police say this was all just elaborate showmanship by Muller to make it seem like there were other people involved. And Muller himself, in an interview from prison, said off the record that he worked alone. But is he just covering for the other members of the group? Because I feel like that might be the case. In an interview they did in 2018, so 3 years after the kidnapping, Denise and Aaron said they still feared retaliation from other members of the group that they believed were still out there roaming around completely free. And I'm extremely surprised, given the history of police bungling this case, that police have given little to no weight to Denise and Aaron's concerns. They seem to have put in zero effort to investigating if there were other people involved and bringing them to justice along with Muller. But then, is it a surprise? Really? With everything we know about the Vallejo Police Department, I'm sure they want this case just over and done. And the quickest way they see to do that is to just let Muller take the fall, which of course would mean that they haven't really learned any lessons in this and that they're just completely uninterested in righting the wrongs in this case, which is really frustrating. My heart just breaks for Denise and Aaron. I read stories saying they had lost their jobs, that they'd lost friends over the media coverage that just painted them in the worst possible light. Denise was and probably still does get just truly awful hate mail from people who still think she hoaxed the kidnapping. But Denise and Aaron's ordeal truly seems to have just brought them closer together, and they seem like they've been able to make the best of just a terrible situation, which is amazing and so inspiring to see. If you are interested in reading the emails that I mentioned sent to the San Francisco Chronicle and Lieutenant Kenny Park, I will include a link to the FBI arrest warrant for Mueller down in the description. And the emails, they're actually really interesting. They're just full of details, way too many for me to include in this video. And the warrant itself is actually really intense. Like, it's a page turner. And that is it for this case, guys. Remember, if you haven't already, to hit subscribe so we can be best friends for life, and leave a comment with your thoughts on this case. I love reading your comments and responding. It seriously makes my day. Lily, would you like to come say bye to your friends? Come on. Look, they're over there. No, not me. There. Are you just gonna awkwardly stand there till I feed you? Oh, what is it? Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you have the best week of all time. We will see you next time. Bye.